The pentagram is a symbol rife with controversy in the Western world, often portrayed as a symbolic representation of Satanism. It has historically been banned in schools, and only fairly recently was approved as a suitable symbol of religious affiliation for United States veterans' headstones. The horror genre makes liberal use of this stock symbol, as does fantasy. Infographics, memes, and articles about the true meaning of the pentagram flood the internet, but are often neglectful of mentioning its usage in general Western esotericism and of its history beyond modern Wicca. This is my attempt to dispel some of the cobwebs that have settled onto this popular, somewhat misunderstood symbol. Firstly, let's discuss the difference between a pentagram and a pentacle. Is there one? The two are often conflated, so why distinguish them at all? Well, it's actually not that complicated. A pentagram can be and is often used as a pentacle, but not all pentacles contain pentagrams. The earliest English usage of the word pentacle comes to us in two books, both written in the 16th century. The Heptameron by Pietro da Bono and the Key of Solomon, falsely attributed to King Solomon, as was common practice, most likely written by an unnamed occultist of the time. Both refer to symbols of a magical nature, but neither book identifies pentacles as intrinsically being pentagrams or containing pentagrams. In the 15th–16th century, occultist Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa popularized the idea that the pentagram was a magical symbol, attributing to it the Neoplatonic five elements, that is, fire, water, air, earth, and idea to the 5 points of the star. If you look at the etymology of the word pentacle, you will find similar words in Latin, Italian, French, and so on. In Latin you have pentaculum, which comes from the prefix penta, meaning 5, and culum, which refers to instrumentality. In Italian, you have pentacolo, which means anything with 5 points. In French you have the 14th century word pentacole, which comes from the prefix pend, meaning to hang, and cole, meaning from neck, which referred to various kinds of magical or apotropaic charms, hung on necklaces or similar devices. In the 19th century, pentacle gained popularity in the verbiage of Western occultism through French occultist Eliphas Levi (1810–1875) in his book Dogme et Rituel de la Haute Magie. Levi coincidentally spelled it pantacle, reflecting the slippery nature of language and various permutations of the word throughout cultures and time. But we should not get hung up too much on such variances, as such are natural through the course of language. In Dogme et Rituel de la Haute Magie, he does include a representation of a pentacle that contains a pentagram, and explains it several times. As will be seen, all mysteries of magic, all symbols of the gnosis, all figures of occultism, all Kabbalistic keys of prophecy, are summed up in the sign of the pentagram, which Paracelsus proclaims to be the greatest and most potent of all signs. Eliphas Levi, Dogme et Rituel de la Haute Magie, and the Empire of the Will over the Astrolite, which is the physical soul of the four elements, is represented in magic by the pentagram, which we have set at the head of this chapter. The elementary spirits are subservient to this sign when employed with understanding, and, by placing it in the circle or on the table of evocations, they can be rendered tractable, which is magically called to imprison them. He also includes other examples of pentacles that do not have pentagrams. Levi would become a major influence on 20th century English occultist Aleister Crowley, who would even go so far as to claim to be a reincarnation of Eliphas Levi, in addition to using the pentacle spelling in varied works. Crowley himself would go on to influence Gerald Gardner, founder of modern Wicca, though the influence should not be overstated. It is worth mentioning, Crowley had a massive influence on Western occultism at the time, especially that of the English-speaking world. Dissecting the indirect and direct influence he had on Gardner's conception of magical practice is hard to pin down due to this fact, and not the focus of this article anyway. Gardner would be influenced by the occult tropes of his time, including the depiction of the pentacles suit of tarot cards in the Rider-Waite as discs inscribed with a pentagram. The Rider-Waite tarot deck was printed in 1910, and Gardner would have certainly come into contact with them. Additionally, Gardner knew about the Key of Solomon text, and probably did know the term pentacle referred to all sorts of magical symbols, not only pentagrams, so the intention behind his choice to define pentacle as containing pentagrams is unknown. To boil it down, pentagrams are often incorporated into pentacles, but not all pentacles contain pentagrams. The pentacles of modern Wicca are indeed pentacles that happen to contain a symbol considered holy and magical by many Wiccans, the pentagram. Much like the position of playing cards in their adoption for tarot, the pentagram symbol itself started to appear reversed. Is the upside-down pentacle really a symbol of the Christian devil? Is the right side up one a symbol of goodness and spirituality? Well, it depends who you ask. Re-enter occultist Eliphaz Levi, who was the first person to make the distinction. The pentagram with 2 points in the ascendant represents Satan as the goat of the Sabbath. When 1 point is in the ascendant, it is the sign of the Savior. The pentagram is the figure of the human body, having the 4 limbs and a single point representing the head. A human figure head downwards naturally represents a demon, that is, intellectual subversion, disorder or madness. Now, if magic be a reality, if occult science be really the true law of the 3 worlds, this absolute sign, this sign ancient as history and more ancient, should and does exercise an incalculable influence upon spirits set free from their material envelope. Eliphaz Levi, Dogme et Ritual de la Haute Magie. This definition, which does not appear before Levi, certainly continued after him. The most recognizable image of the reverse pentagram can be attributed to French occultist Stanislas de Guaita, 1861–1897, who created the first ever goat pentagram found in Le Clef de la Magie Noire, 1897, and which was inspired by Levi's own depiction of the now widely popular Baphomet. Additionally, this goat pentagram would be redrawn by the Church of Satan and used as their logo, thus entrenching the idea that it was tied to the Christian devil, even though the Church of Satan defines itself as materialistic and atheistic. The distinction of right and wrong side-up pentagrams continues to this day among various Western esotericists and some modern neo-pagans, though by no means does this constitute a consensus. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa associated the 5 points of the pentagram not only with the 5 Neoplatonist elements, but can also be seen to associate them with 5 classical planets. Shown below is a figure of the human body pentagram, with Mars, Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, and Mercury. These 5 planets would also have had alchemical associations. Also of note is the Pythagorean or health pentagram, which can be found in addition to the human body pentagram in Agrippa's De Occulta Philosophia Libri 3, 1533. The health pentagram is associated with Pythagoreanism, a mystico-philosophical school of ancient Greece. While Pythagoreanism's influence on Agrippa is hard to determine, it is clear that he knew of them, referencing them in De Occulta. Democritus and Orpheus, and many Pythagoreans, having most diligently searched into the virtues of celestial things and natures of inferior things, said that all things are full of God and not without cause. For there is nothing of such transcending virtues, which being destitute of divine assistance, is content with the nature of itself. The pentagram has a history as an apotropaic symbol, that is, a symbol meant to ward off evil influences, especially in European folk magic. The word comes from the Greek apotropeos, literally averting evil. An example can be found in the Grieman Drudenfis, which means Druid's foot in English, a Druid being a kind of malevolent German spirit. The Drudenfis is referenced in Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust, and has been in linguistic usage since in reference to protective pentagrams. Another example of an apotropaic pentagram can be found on the Namela tenant farm, part of the Suosaari Outdoor Museum in Finland, where a pentagram was found carved into an old farmhouse. The pentagram appears in Arthurian myth via the poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, written by an unknown poet of the late 14th century. The poem tells a story of Sir Gawain, Knight of the Round Table, according to the myths being challenged by another knight who was entirely green. The story of the Green Knight and Gawain, and the mystery behind the unknown poet responsible for the myth, are both intriguing in their own right. The symbology of the Green Knight is complex, but most simply, he refers to the pagan tradition still in the medieval memory of recent past and collective unconscious. Of particular interest is the passage describing Gawain's shield, a pentangle, another word for pentagram, bearing striking similarity to the term pentacle. Adorned Gawain's shield consisted of 5 points, each overlapping one another, a sign that Solomon set formerly, and referred to as the endless knot. The poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is estimated to have been written in the 14th century, almost 200 years before Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa would identify the pentagram as a magical symbol, and almost 500 years before Gerald Gardiner would identify pentacles as being the well-known stock example of an encircled pentagram. It should be noted that the Key of Solomon grimoire is estimated to have been written sometime around the 14th to 15th centuries. It is unknown whether there was any relationship between the unknown poet of Gawain's myth or the unknown author of the Key of Solomon. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight was written in Middle English, whereas the Key of Solomon is thought to have been written in Latin or Italian originally. This tells us very little, of course. The pseudographical nature of the key was common in its time, as was the reference to the pentacle of being a sign that Solomon set formerly in the Green Knight myth. It was typical of Renaissance-era occultists to attribute much to King Solomon, similar to how early Christian writers would assume the names of gospel figures, ostensibly to establish credibility, though the reasons are up for debate. To those familiar with the history of Western esotericism, it should come as no surprise that Gerald Gardner may have sought to establish credibility by claiming, falsely, to be initiated by what he called the New Forest Coven, which he claimed was a coven of witches, belonging to a pre-Christian pagan tradition. While it's certainly possible that he was really initiated into an unaltered, unadulterated version of indigenous, pre-Christian witchcraft, most anthropologists, and even many occultists and Wiccans, agree that the story is likely an invention. Others think that the truth is a little more complicated and involves some sleight of tongue from Gardner. Debates and discussions about the reality of the New Forest Coven. It would certainly coincide with the general esoteric tradition of claiming pseudepigraphal origins, but there is very little definitive evidence either way. Gardner considered himself an amateur anthropologist and archaeologist, and already had preconceived notions of just what witchcraft was in European history, termed the witch cult hypothesis. It was likewise popularized by Egyptologist Margaret Murray, and accounts for much of the mythology surrounding the creation of modern Wicca. The witch cult hypothesis has since been largely discredited. The idea that he just happened to find and be initiated by a coven of witches whom he never could provide evidence of existing, whose supposedly pure form of pre-Christian witchcraft just happened to coincide perfectly with what an amateur anthropologist in the 1800s already presumed to be true, seems far-fetched. The pentagram has had a varied existence, and its simplicity and elegance is reflected by the fact it can be found as a symbol of importance around the world, in addition to Western esotericism. Why do we feel the need to ascribe ancient and arcane origins to a practice to establish its credibility? Why do we look to the past for answers? What is someone interested in, or practicing, Western esotericism looking for? Will they be heartbroken to find the history and story of such a field is rife with myths, tall tales, suspicious claims, as well as odd and groundbreaking adventures, inquiries, and iconoclasm? Why does it matter to us whether the pentagram means only one true thing? The pentagram, symbol of what exactly? Depends who you ask. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.